Alrighty, looks like we are live. Welcome, everyone. Um, you know what? I want to start off with something interesting. You ever read a comment online and think there's a lot more behind than that? Than sorry, let me start that again. Uh, it's live, right? Did you ever read a comment online and think there's a lot more behind that than just a few angry words? Well, we had one come through this week, and I'm going to read it out exactly like it is. Here we go. It is, I'll read it online. You should just shut up and go back to your own country. We are sick of bloody foreigners. Now, we can we can react to that in so many different ways, right? We can either, fire back, react to it or ignore it, right? A lot of people are like saying, hey, Gora, just ignore these comments. Or you could take a step back and ask, what's really going on underneath that? Because you know what, it was interesting. It was actually about commentary on what I was talking about, how to invest in property, right? So before we get started, hey everyone, my name is Gaurav Gupta, founder of the CEO and founder of Ethical Property Investments. What we do is we help everyday Aussies, people working hard, regardless of the color of their skin, trying to get ahead, invest in properties that bring in strong cash flow while also creating better housing options for the people living in them. And this week, we're going to talk about something a little bit different. We're going to be talking about where these reactions come from. We're going to unpack like all this big concern around co-living, and I'm going to actually share how we actually see our role in all of this beyond just property itself. And I might go on a rant or two. Those that know what I do on these properties and beers. So if you're watching live, come say hi, drop me a comment. If you're watching in a recorded format, because it does stay recorded for a while, drop me a line as well. So let's start. Because this is properties and beers, we have to have a beverage today. I've got vodka and soda, pine lime. Yes, I have had this before. No carbs, no sugar, no gluten by the And Company. They do very clean vodka. So join in. Let's give it a go. Let's crack it open. Yes, actually quite nice. Yeah, it's like a less sugary pineapple pina colada drink. Now, remember this session's called Properties and Beers. It's not called Lassie and Land, right? So this is an Aussie situation. We're talking about the Australian property market, dealing with Australian people. We're not talking about any other country unless I use it to reference Australia, which I have done a couple of times before in the last few properties and beers, right? But in specific reference to the Australian property market. So no, it is not called Lassie and Land, right? It's properties and beers. So back to that comment, right? It wasn't the first, and it definitely won't be the last. And to be honest, I don't even take it personally anymore. It's fuel for fire. And as one of my friends said quite passionately, he said some of the most passive aggressive stuff I do is respond to those comments, right? But no, honestly, I do take it seriously because when something like that shows up, it tells you there's something about the environment people are living in right now. It tells you this pressure building. It's like a powder keg, right? And when pressure builds financially, emotionally, it all tends to come out sideways and not always in a well thought out way. Sometimes in a sentence just like that, what I told you about earlier. So instead of brushing it off, I think it's worth really taking the step and asking, what's really sitting underneath this? So, I was reminded by a part of the Australian national anthem. Now, those that aren't aware, the Australian national anthem actually has a second verse. There's a part of Australia, Advanced Australian Fair, that most people don't hear very often. And I'm going to recite it to you. So I've got it on my other screen. And I want to just recite it to you because I want to explain to you what it means to me, right? Beneath our radiance, beneath our radiant Southern Cross, we'll toil with hearts and hands. That means Australia's designed for the people that are ready to work for it. It's not designed for a free handout. It's designed for people that really want to work for advancing their own family, advancing Australia, and advancing the Commonwealth, right? To make this Commonwealth of ours renowned of all the lands. As I said, if you work, you have a chance to advance this Commonwealth and make it renowned amongst all the lands. For those who've come across the seas, we've boundless plains to share. Now, I know it seems less and less like we've got those boundless plains to share. That is more a function, I believe, of some interesting government decisions over the last, not just this government, but the previous government as well, including taxes going up by over 100% in bills. And really a lack of that 1.2 million housing shortage that we have. And with courage, let us all combine to sing Advance Australia Fair. And it says, let us all combine. We're not separated because it's really important in times like these that, when pressure builds up, when people want us to be separate, we stand together and united. With courage, let us all combine. It doesn't say in the easy times, it says with courage, let us all combine. Advance Australia Fair. In joyful strains, then let us sing Advance Australia Fair. And you know what? I believe in that second verse. I grew up with that second verse. And I grew up reciting that every week, at least once, if not more than that at school, right? Not many people know that there's that second verse, but I think it's really important because Advance Australia Fair talks about Australia as a place where people from different parts of the world can come together. They can contribute and build something shared. Now, I'm not bringing that up to lecture anyone here. I'm bringing it up because when you really look at how the country functions, it's pretty accurate. You've got people from all sorts of backgrounds, including the Indian diaspora, right? Involved in construction, development, trade, small business, investing, and more. In fact, the Indian diaspora, I'm just going to take a moment here to talk about it, pays some of the highest proportion of taxes in the country by ethnicity, according to stats from the ABS and ATO. Now you can say, hey, I've got this one scene, this one exception, and that exception. I'm talking about overall, according to the ABS and the Australian Tax Office, some of the highest proportion of taxes in the country by ethnicity is by the Indian diaspora, right? When I say diaspora, I'm including people that are born here, right? I'm including people that have come to this country like myself. And, when I say people that are born here, like my own family, my own sister was born here, right? So what home should she go back to for those people that are talking about going back home, right? So, a lot of them are actually directly contributing to the housing supply. They're not taking away from it, right? These are the ones on site, managing builds, taking on risks, creating homes that people eventually live in. And that's a part of the story that doesn't always get talked about. If you strip the emotion back a bit, there's always a few real pressures underneath comments like this. And I want to break it down a little bit further. The first one is housing affordability. For a lot of people, owning a home feels further away than it used to, even just before COVID, right? Rent's gone up, interest rates have moved, the general cost of living is tighter. And when that happens, people start to feel like the system isn't working for them anymore. And I get it. Like the system is a little bit screwed up at the moment. Maybe not in the way that you agree with or you don't agree with. I think the system, there's place for it to move in the right place where it creates a good balance of what we need to do. And I know there was a piece came out yesterday between Mr. Purple Fingers, Jordan Vander, whatever his name is. Sorry, I apologize if I don't remember his name, and Eddie Deline. And it was really interesting. Eddie said that if you took away all the investors, who would actually generally be able to build these houses? Because the government certainly isn't able to keep up. It's up to investors to actually build these houses to alleviate the housing crisis, right? Now, I'm going to continue on my drink. The second piece that I want to bring up is complexity. Property used to feel a lot more straightforward. Now there are more strategies and there's also more rules and more moving parts. And for someone not actively in the space, it can feel like the whole playbook is something that haven't been given. And it creates a gap, right? Because between people who understand how to navigate it and people who, feel like they're stuck on the outside looking in, it's a bit of a challenge, right? Now, the third piece is visibility. Migration's visible. You can see it. You can point to it. Hey, these people are a slightly different color, right? Whereas things like planning restrictions, supply bottlenecks, construction costs, they're harder to see and harder to connect. People see the people of different color moving into the country. They don't see the 100% increase in taxes on a build over the last 6 years. So naturally, attention gravitates towards what's visible. Even that's only one part of the much, much bigger picture. So we'll bring it back to the core issue, right? Let's bring it all back. People need places to live. And there are a few things that genuinely make a difference. The first thing is supply. At the end of the day, if there's not enough homes for the number of people who need them, the pressure builds, prices move, and competition increases. The second is how we use the housing we already have. Now, there are a lot of properties where space isn't being fully utilized, spare rooms, underused areas. And while at the same time, people are struggling to find something affordable. And you might say, hey, everyone should live in a 4-bedroom 2-bathroom house, etc., etc. Well, I'm gonna sort of question that a little bit, right? We have the largest houses in the world, right? We're living in larger houses, or I think it's from memory, it's like 30% bigger than New Zealand, and about 20% larger than America. Yes, we have larger houses here in Australia than America. Now, I'm not saying you should live in a dog box, right? I'm certainly not suggesting that. What I'm saying is that from a worldwide comparison, we have the largest houses in the world, right? And that's contributing to the housing supply crisis. Um, quite dramatically. And look, the third thing is having different types of different housing. Not everyone's in the same stage of life. Some people are students, some people are working professionals, some people are in transitions, and yes, some people are in families. They don't all need or want a full house themselves. Heck, when I was younger, I lived in a share house, right? Kind of an illegal share house, but I know what it's like. I've lived in multiple share houses, right? And that's where the different models start to come into the conversation. So let's talk about another comment in just a moment, because this is the Facebook edition, right? Now, by the way, some of you guys are going, hey, Gordon, why are you responding to Facebook comments? Because I think if someone's made a comment, sometimes it's important to talk about what's going on underneath it, as I mentioned before. So there's another comment I saw this week. Here's what someone shared, and this was a more nuanced comment, right? You know, giving less space for more costs, telling renters how to live, pushing up prices. This should be banned, right? That was what their response was to co-living. And look, I actually appreciate the way this was written, not because it was like a random throwaway comment by someone with a picture of a marijuana leaf on their Facebook profile. It was thought behind it. There was concern behind it. So instead of rushing past it, I actually wanted to take some time to go through it properly, because there's another perspective, right? The first comment was, you're giving people less space for more cost. At face value, it can feel like that, right? You walk into co-living property, you see individual rooms instead of a whole house, and the first instinct is to compare the sizes, right? Because sometimes in some people's mind, size matters, right? Not going to go there. But when renters are making decisions, they're usually looking at the full picture. They're not looking at the full picture. What's the weekly cost? Are bills included? Is it close to work or uni? Is it easy to move in or out? Can people afford $800 a week to live in a house? I know quite a few people who can't. And for a lot of people, especially in tighter renter markets, renting a full property on their own isn't even on the table. And the comparison the comparison isn't big space versus small space. It's often, can I afford to live here comfortably? Does this setup make my week easier? And in many cases, co-living ends up being the more manageable option. Now, it's not a long-term option for people living for like 10 years, but certainly an option where people can live in while they get, the next stage of their lives together, right? People like, oh, telling renters how to live. You shouldn't tell renters how to live. This one comes up a bit, and I understand the concern. No one likes feeling controlled. But if you really look at how shared living has always worked, there's usually some level of structure anyway, unwritten rules, expectations, agreements between housemates. The difference in co-living is that the expectations are made clear up front. Things like shared space, cleanliness, general behavior, they're outlined in the document, so people know what they're stepping into before they step into one of these houses, right? And I get it. If you have a family, no one in that situation should be living in co-living. But is it fair, on the other hand, for a single couple to live in a whole house during what we have now, which is a housing crisis? Look, having these rules here tends to reduce friction, and I don't believe it increases friction. It actually reduces it, right? And then there's the other one, is taking away the right to choose your own flatmates. Well, this is an interesting one, because in old school share housing, choosing your own flatmates can go either way. Sometimes it works great. Sometimes it turns into a difficult living situation really quickly. Hell, I've lived through both in my younger years. And yes, as I mentioned before, I've lived in unofficial share houses myself. So I know what works and what doesn't work, because I've got lived experience living in some of these things, right? And hey, it's almost a rite of passage, isn't it, to live in a share house? You're younger, you're going to, you've started your first job, or, you moved out or in uni, etc. And here's the thing, right? What co-living tries to do is reduce that uncertainty that a lot of people feel in some of these houses. So when you partner up with a good property mentor and a good property manager, there's a screening process for tenants, some level of matching that is a bit more oversight that, yeah, I reckon this relationship will go well in the long term, which more often than not, there's a bit of challenge when you live in these unofficial share houses, right? Now, I believe that creates a more stable experience. So especially, for renters who are new to a city or just want something straightforward without the trial and error of finding that right mix. And then I've got the whole, oh, you're pushing up rental prices and you're making things worse. Well, this is where it helps to take a real bird's eye view. Co-living changes how a property generates income. That's true. But it also changes how many people that property can accommodate. So instead of one household with, 2.5 people, right? You might have several individuals living there comfortably. And what we do is we provide them the facilities to live there comfortably. You've got en suites, you've got individual split systems. No one's forcing you to live in your room a certain way. You're doing it on your own accord. And that creates more entry points into the market during the housing crisis that we have right now, right? Someone who can't afford a full rental, which is $800 a week, might be able to afford $300, including bills, to take a room. And that matters in tight conditions because without those options, the alternative for many people is being priced out entirely, right? So rather than reducing access, it really opens up another layer of it for some people. And look, I want to bring up another elephant in the room. Where's my elephant? He's around here somewhere. Anyway, the average density per household is now lower than ever, even lower than before COVID. So we've got less people per house now than before COVID, right? And at the same time, I've seen some really shitty situations, and I don't say that lightly, where 10 people are sharing a 4-bedroom house where mattresses are on the floor. They're illegal share houses that are effectively mini slums. And you know what? We can do better. We've got to do better. And that's why I'm really heavy on co-living being one way of alleviating this housing crisis. I believe it's ethical in that way, right? Now, the other thing is it should be banned. Well, that's a very bold claim, but I get where this feeling comes from. When something looks unfamiliar or there's a concern around fairness, the instinct naturally is to shut it down, right? But if you look at demand, people are choosing these setups to live in, right? Young professional students, people are relocating. They're actively looking for this kind of arrangement. And look, in one of my own co-living houses, I've got someone that loves that arrangement. They're on $140,000 a year income. They're choosing that experience for themselves. Now, if we look at stats, the average person living in one of our co-living houses earns $75,000 a year, right? Now, taking a step back, does that mean every co-living property is run well? No. Like any model, there's operators who will cut corners. And that's where regulations and standards matter, and doing things ethically matters, right? But when it's done properly and ethically with safety, quality, tenant experience in mind, and that last one's really important, tenancy experience, keep that in mind, it can and it will and it does generally improve access to housing, right? And here's the thing, I'll give my personal example. So I have a house in Northcote that we leased out to, we thought were, 2 or 3 people. Turns out they basically built themselves an illegal share house and were leasing the house out for, back then it was roughly about $75,000 a year. This is a house in Northcote. And they treated like house like crap. They really did. And it was an unofficial share house, right? That's what they turned it into. We then said, hey, why don't we turn this into a proper, legitimate co-living house, do the compliance work on it, put extra bathrooms in there. And we went and spent like $200,000 renovating that particular house. Now, renovation's not for everyone, but we decided to do that in that particular location. Now, the house, we more than doubled the income on the house. The people living in there are having a better experience in that house. And there are more people living in that house now, alleviating the housing crisis as well further than what were living in there before in an unofficial, effectively illegal share house, right? So that's what I'm talking about when it comes to be done properly, which, really can improve that access to housing, right? And so all this leads to a bigger question that sits behind everything we've talked to today, because from the outside, it's easy to assume what we do. But the reality, my friends, is a lot more layered than that. And to be honest, what we covered here is really just scratching the surface. And speaking of which, I haven't even had had more sips of this. So, yep. So there's a bit of bubbles. Excuse my little burps. Sorry. Right. These are the kind of questions we spend a lot of time unpacking, and both from a renter's point of view as well as an investor's perspective, because there's a big difference between hearing about co-living and understanding how to do it properly. So next week on Thursday, March the 26th at 1:30 p.m., we're putting together a deeper session. We walk through all of that in more detail. We're going to go through these objections, the common ones, the tougher ones, and really break it all down in more details, right? But more importantly, we're going to share the framework on how we use our very own co-living investments. That's right. So you can be sure that we're not only talking theories or generic strategies, we're going to teach you how to look at a property, how to assess it works, and how to make sure it holds up over time in real life rather than on paper. We're even going to have some of our clients that have built co-living come on there, as well as one or two co-living managers, right? Because once you understand that side of it, the whole conversation around co-living starts to feel a lot clearer. And that naturally brings us to the bigger question. What are we actually doing in this space? Because from the outside, it can look one way, but when you're closer, there's a hell of a lot more into it, right? So a lot of people look at our business and think property. Well, that's the obvious part. Property, strategies, numbers, yields, that's like day-to-day operations. What shows up, that's what shows up really, that's surface level stuff, right? Here's what people come for. Some people come in because they've heard about co-living. Others are curious about specialist disability accommodation. Some just want to understand how to invest without making a costly mistake. They're looking for direction. They're looking for something that makes sense in a market with high interest rates, high taxes, high craziness, something that feels overwhelming out in the market. But after a few conversations, you really start to see a shift. The questions change, and it becomes less about what should I buy and more about, am I thinking about this the right way? How do I know this will hold up long term? You know, questions like, what happens if things don't go to plan? Because shit happens in life, right? You've got to have a good mentor to protect you and to teach you the right way to adjust as you need to adjust. Because that's clarity, my friends, right? For someone to walk alongside you and help you make a decision with more certainty. That's what we do over here at Ethical Property Investments. That's what people walk away with. Now, over time, you notice that people carry themselves differently. They're not reacting to every headline or every comment they read online. They've got a framework they can lean on, like, here's my pathway, here's what I'm doing, and here's my plan B in case, you know, shit happens, right? And they understand the decisions they're making. Look, they understand the assets that they have serve a purpose. They house people, they create income, and they give the investor more options in their own lives. Pride in these properties doesn't just stem from that extra cash flow, but also from the integrity and care embedded in the process. And that's why I'm proud to be part of what we do and how we do it. At Ethical Property Investments, we transform people into confident, cash flow positive investors who build wealth they're proud of, right? So if you're watching this and you made it this far, there's a good chance you've been thinking about investing in property differently. And here's something we notice. A lot of people watch our videos regularly, but they haven't followed the page yet. So make sure you follow Ethical Property Investments. We have these conversations every week, or you just hit the follow button on even my own personal things that you followed on. We'll talk real scenarios, real questions, and honesty, right? Honest breakdowns of what's happening in the market, and sometimes on Facebook comments, right? So if you want to stay in the loop, make sure you follow us. And that, you know, that way you won't miss what's happening. So I appreciate you being here. I'll see you on the next one. Team, have a fantastic weekend and cheers.